The conference chamber floated in the void between stars, a massive structure built by the Korvax Imperium to demonstrate their power. Inside, representatives from 47 alien species sat in their designated sections, watching the humans with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood alone at the center of the chamber. She was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching 5.5 feet tall, with gray streaks in her black hair. She wore a simple dark suit, nothing like the elaborate robes and armor of the alien delegates surrounding her. Her hands were steady despite the weight of what she carried. The Korvax High Commander, a being called Thexvar, towered above her from his elevated platform. His species resembled great insects with 4 arms and a carapace that gleamed like polished obsidian. When he spoke, his voice was amplified through the chamber's systems, making it boom like thunder. "Human," Thexvar said, making the word sound like an insult. "Your species has been granted the honor of this audience. The Korvax Imperium and its allied species have ruled this sector of space for 12,000 years. We have brought order, peace, and civilization to hundreds of worlds." Elena said nothing. She simply waited. Thexvar continued, his mandibles clicking with irritation at her silence. "Your kind appeared in our space merely 200 years ago. You have established 17 colonies and territories claimed by the Imperium. You extract resources without permission. You expand without regard for established boundaries. You are children playing with tools you do not understand." Around the chamber, other delegates made sounds of agreement. The Vrel, aquatic beings in environmental suits, rippled their approval. The Manthan, creatures of pure energy contained in crystalline shells, pulsed with satisfaction. They had all been where humanity was now. They had all learned their place. "The Imperium has been patient," Thexvar said. "We have allowed you time to mature, to understand the reality of your situation. That patience is now exhausted. You will surrender all colonial holdings. You will submit to Imperium governance. Your military will be dissolved. Your species will be integrated into our structure as a client race. These terms are not negotiable." Elena finally spoke, her voice calm and clear. "And if we refuse?" The chamber erupted in sounds that might have been laughter from dozens of alien species. Thexvar leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering. "Then we will demonstrate why every species in this chamber learned to obey. Your colonies will be seized by force. Your ships will be destroyed. Your homeworld will be blockaded until you learn wisdom. Do not mistake our offer for weakness, human. We have fought 1,000 wars. We have never lost." Elena reached into her jacket and withdrew a small data chip. She held it up for all to see. "Before I respond on behalf of Earth and all human colonies, I would like to play a message. It has been approved by every human government, every colonial authority, and every independent station. It represents our unified position." Thexvar waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. "Very well. Deliver your surrender with whatever ceremony your primitive culture requires." Elena placed the chip into the chamber's central console. A holographic image appeared above her, showing Earth from orbit, blue and white and beautiful. Then the view pulled back, showing the 17 human colonies scattered across their small section of space. They were tiny, insignificant dots compared to the vast Korvax Imperium. Elena's voice played over the recording. She had made this message 3 months ago. After the first Korvax threats had been delivered, she had hoped it would never need to be played. "To the Korvax Imperium and all species of the Galactic Council," the recording began. "We are humanity. We are new to this galaxy, and we understand that our presence has caused concern. We come in peace. We wish only to live, to grow, and to find our place among the stars." The recording showed images of human colonies, families walking in dome habitats, children playing in parks built under alien skies, farmers tending crops in hydroponic facilities, scientists studying strange new worlds. "We do not want war," the recording continued. "We have seen enough of war. For 10,000 years on our homeworld we fought each other. We developed weapons of terrible power. We killed millions in conflicts over land, resources, and ideology. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once." The images changed. Archive footage from Earth's history played across the hologram. Ancient battles with swords and spears. Medieval sieges. Trenches filled with mud and blood. Cities burning under aerial bombardment. Mushroom clouds rising over devastated landscapes. "We learned from our mistakes," Elena's recorded voice said. "We learned that war destroys both victor and defeated. We learned that the cost of conflict is always greater than the prize. We came to the stars hoping to leave that legacy behind. The delegates watched with growing discomfort. Some of them had fought wars, but nothing like what they were seeing. The humans had been remarkably creative in finding ways to kill each other. But we also learned something else, the recording continued, and Elena's tone changed. It became harder, colder. We learned that sometimes war chooses you. Sometimes peaceful intentions are not enough. Sometimes survival requires you to become what you hate most. The hologram now showed human military vessels. They were crude compared to Korvax ships, but there were many of them. Crews trained in combat simulations. Marines practicing with weapons designed to kill in 100 different ways. Factories producing missiles, railguns, and things the Korvax could not identify. "If you force this war upon us, understand what you are choosing," Elena's voice said. "You will face a species that spent millennia perfecting the art of killing. We know every trick, every strategy, every horror that war can produce. We have fought in deserts and jungles, in frozen wastelands and burning cities. We have fought in the depths of oceans and in the thin air of mountains. We will fight in the void of space with the same determination." Thexvar shifted uncomfortably on his platform. This was not the speech he had expected. "You will win battles," the recording admitted. "Your ships are superior. Your technology is more advanced. You have numbers we cannot match. You might raise our colonies. You might even bombard our homeworld. But we will make you pay for every meter of ground in blood and treasure. We will make the cost so high that your empire will crack under the weight of it." The hologram showed Earth again, but this time it was surrounded by defensive platforms, missile batteries, and ships arranged in protective formations. "This is not a threat," Elena's recorded voice said, and there was genuine sadness in it now. "This is a warning. This is a plea. Choose peace. Let us find a way to coexist. Because if you choose war, everyone will pay a price. War has a price you will regret." The hologram faded. The real Elena stood in the center of the chamber, meeting Thexvar's gaze without flinching. "That is humanity's response to your ultimatum," she said quietly. "We will not surrender. We will not submit. If you want our worlds, you will have to take them, and we will make you wish you had never tried." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Thexvar began to laugh, a chittering sound that was picked up by other delegates. "You think your primitive weapons frighten the Imperium? You think your history of tribal conflicts prepares you to face us? We have conquered species with technology you cannot imagine. We have destroyed civilizations that would have crushed you." Elena bowed her head slightly. "Then I am sorry for what is coming. For all of us." She turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, Thexvar was already issuing orders to his fleet commanders. The Imperium would mobilize. They would teach these upstart humans their place in the galactic order. It would be quick, decisive, and final. As Elena's shuttle departed the conference station, she looked back at the massive structure, at the ships of the Imperium gathering in the darkness. She had delivered the message. She had given them every chance to choose peace. They had chosen war instead. Back on Earth, in military command centers and government offices, in colonial stations and aboard warships, humans received the news. The ultimatum had been rejected. The Imperium was coming. Orders went out to every human installation. Protocols were activated that had been planned for years but never implemented. Factories switched to wartime production. Reserves were called up. Children were evacuated from outer colonies to more defensible positions. Humanity had 200 years in space. They had 17 small colonies. They had ships that were barely competitive with alien technology. But they had something else. They had the memory of 10,000 years of warfare. They had the determination of a species that had clawed its way up from caves to the stars. They had the willingness to pay any price for survival. The Korvax Imperium had won 1,000 wars. They had never fought humanity. That was about to change. The Korvax fleet arrived at New Haven Colony with overwhelming force. 300 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons powered and shields at maximum. Admiral Kreshevon watched from his flagship's command deck as the human colony grew larger on the view screens. New Haven was humanity's third oldest colony, home to almost 2 million people. It orbited a yellow star similar to Earth's sun, and the planet below had been slowly transformed into something humans could live on. Dome cities dotted the surface, connected by transport tubes. Orbital stations handled trade and shipbuilding. "Scan for military presence," Kreshevon ordered. His species, the Kelvar, were traditional warriors who had served the Korvax for centuries. They had conquered dozens of worlds and never questioned the righteousness of their cause. Detecting 47 human vessels, Admiral, the sensor officer reported, mostly civilian transports and cargo haulers. We count only 12 military ships, all in the cruiser class or smaller. Kreshvan's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Intelligence had been accurate. The humans were poorly defended, scattered across too many colonies to concentrate their forces effectively. This would be over quickly. He opened a channel to the colony. This is Admiral Kreshvan of the Korvax Imperium. You have 1 hour to evacuate all military personnel and surrender this world. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. The response came from Governor Sarah Chen, a middle-aged woman who appeared on the view screen looking tired but calm. Admiral, we cannot evacuate 2 million people in 1 hour. We need at least 3 days to organize transport. You have 1 hour, Kreshvan repeated. Evacuate who you can. The rest will become subjects of the Imperium. The channel closed. Kreshvan settled back to wait. He had fought enough wars to know how this would go. The humans would panic, maybe fire a few desperate shots and then surrender when they realized how outmatched they were. By this time tomorrow, the colony would be under Imperium control, and his fleet would move on to the next target. 58 minutes later, the human military ship suddenly accelerated away from the colony, fleeing toward the outer system. Kreshvan ordered his fastest interceptors to pursue and destroy them. It was almost disappointing how quickly they ran. Then his sensor officer made a confused sound. Admiral, the colony's orbital stations are powering down. They are going completely dark. Life support? Still functioning, but everything else is offline. Their defensive weapons, sensors, communications, all shutting down. Kreshvan frowned. This was unexpected. Are they surrendering? Unknown, sir. We are not receiving any communications. Send boarding teams to the stations. Deploy occupation forces to the surface, secure all facilities, and take control of the infrastructure. The operation went smoothly. The Korvax Marines encountered no resistance. The humans on the stations and in the surface cities were cooperative, almost passive. They lined up to be processed, provided information about food stores and medical supplies, and showed the occupation forces where everything was located. This is easier than expected, Commander Thel remarked as he reported from one of the surface domes. Remain vigilant, Kreshvan warned. The humans may be planning something. But as hours passed and then days, nothing happened. New Haven was firmly under Imperium control. The human military ships had escaped, but the colony itself was taken without firing a shot. Kreshvan reported the victory to High Command and prepared to move on to the next target. Over the following month, the pattern repeated across human space. The Imperium's massive fleets descended on colonies, and the humans either retreated or surrendered after minimal resistance. 3 more worlds fell to Korvax control. The Galactic Council praised the Imperium for their restraint and efficient conquest, but then the problems started. On New Haven, occupation forces began falling ill. It started with a few Marines who developed respiratory problems. Within days, hundreds were sick. Within 2 weeks, the entire occupation force was incapacitated. The illness seemed specifically designed to affect Kelvar physiology, while leaving humans untouched. Biological warfare, the Imperium's medical staff reported. Deliberately engineered pathogen, released into the environmental systems after we took control. The second colony experienced different problems. The power plants that the humans had so helpfully shown the occupation forces how to operate suddenly began malfunctioning. Cascading failures shut down life support in several domes. By the time Korvax technicians realized the systems had been deliberately sabotaged with time-delayed programming, thousands of their personnel were dead from exposure to the planet's toxic atmosphere. The third colony seemed peaceful for 3 weeks. Then every piece of captured human technology simultaneously exploded. Ships in dock, weapons and armories, computers and command centers, all contained hidden charges that activated on a synchronized timer. The colony's main orbital station was completely destroyed, taking 2,000 Korvax personnel with it. High Commander Thexvar convened an emergency council meeting. His compound eyes reflected his fury as he addressed the assembled commanders. The humans are employing tactics that violate every convention of civilized warfare. They are using biological weapons, sabotage, and terrorist attacks against legitimate military forces. Admiral Kreshvan, wounded and recovering from the New Haven incident, spoke from his medical bed via hologram. They are not fighting like a military, High Commander. They are fighting like partisans, like guerrillas. Every colony we take becomes a trap. Then we will stop trying to occupy their worlds intact, Thexvar decided. New orders to all fleet commanders. When you encounter human colonies, you will bombard from orbit until all military installations are destroyed. Only then will you send ground forces. This new strategy was implemented at the 4th colony, Redemption. The Korvax fleet pounded the surface installations with kinetic bombardment for 3 days before sending troops down. The colony was in ruins, but at least it was not booby-trapped, except the troops found something that made even hardened Korvax warriors uncomfortable. In one of the collapsed domes, they discovered a recording device still functioning. It played a message from the colony's former governor. "You came here to conquer us," the recording said. "You destroyed our homes, killed our families, and salted our earth. You think this makes you victorious. But look around you. This colony took us 15 years to build. It will take you twice that long to make it productive again, and we will be back long before then. Every world you take costs you more than it costs us. Every victory makes you weaker. How many more victories can you afford?" The Korvax forces began to understand what they were facing. This was not a conventional war where armies met in battle, and one side surrendered when they were beaten. The humans were fighting a war of attrition, making every inch of space as expensive as possible for the Imperium to control. Meanwhile, human military forces that had retreated from the colonies were not idle. They struck at Korvax supply convoys in lightning raids, then disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. They mined hyperspace lanes with weapons that the Imperium's sensors could barely detect. They hacked into communication networks and spread misinformation that caused several friendly fire incidents. 6 months into the war, the Korvax had captured 5 human colonies. They had also lost over 400 ships, suffered tens of thousands of casualties, and spent resources equivalent to the previous decade of military operations. The costs were mounting faster than anyone had predicted. In the Galactic Council chambers, other species began asking questions. The Vrel representative spoke with characteristic bluntness. "High Commander, your original assessment was that this conflict would last 3 months at most. It has been twice that long, and the humans show no signs of surrender. How much longer will this continue?" Thexvar bristled at the implied criticism. "The humans are more resistant than anticipated, but their defeat is inevitable. They cannot win. They can only delay." "Delay at what cost?" asked the Manthan delegate, its crystalline form pulsing with concern. "The Imperium's treasury is being drained. Trade routes are disrupted, and other species are watching this conflict very carefully." That last statement contained an unspoken threat. The Imperium's power rested not just on military might, but on the perception that resistance was futile. If the humans could tie down Korvax forces indefinitely, other species might start thinking about rebellion. Thexvar understood the danger. "We will increase our commitment. The human homeworld Earth will be our next target. When we blockade their homeworld, they will have no choice but to surrender." But as plans were made to assault Earth, troubling reports came from the occupied colonies. Human resistance fighters had appeared, emerging from hidden bases in uninhabited regions. They conducted raids on occupation forces, then vanished back into the wilderness. Korvax patrols sent to hunt them often never returned. One such patrol did return, but with only 3 survivors out of 30. They brought a message that had been forced into their ship's computer by the humans before they were released. The message was simple. You should have listened to the transmission. Admiral Kreshevon, finally recovered from his illness, read the message and felt something he had not experienced in his long military career. Deep in the asteroid belt of the Titan system, Admiral Chen Wei reviewed the latest intelligence reports from her command ship. The vessel was hidden among thousands of similar rocks, its energy signature masked to appear as just another piece of space debris. This was how humanity fought now, from the shadows, striking where the enemy least expected. Chen was 63 years old and had been retired from Earth's Navy when the war started. She had served in the resource conflicts of the 2150s. The ugly little wars over asteroid mining rights and water ice deposits. She knew how to fight when you were outnumbered and outgunned. Now that experience made her invaluable. "The Korvax are moving their supply depot from Kepler Station to a more secure location," her intelligence officer reported. "They have learned we have been tracking their logistics network." "Of course they have," Chen said. "We taught them that lesson 3 times. Now they think they are being clever. What is their new location? They are using the old Vrel trading post at coordinate 773 Mark 9. It is heavily defended with sensor nets and patrol ships. Chen smiled, an expression that made her officers nervous. When the Admiral smiled, it meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Perfect. Start spreading rumors through our intelligence network that we are planning to hit their command station at Meridian Prime. Make it loud and obvious. Meanwhile, prep Strike Team 7 for the real operation. Yes, Admiral. This was the dance they had been perfecting for 6 months. Misdirection, deception, and strikes where the enemy had weakened their defenses. The Korvax had superior ships and weapons, but they were fighting across a huge area against an enemy who refused to stand still and fight fair. Humanity had learned many lessons from their long history of warfare. One of the most important was that you did not fight the enemy's war. You made them fight yours. 3 days later, while Korvax reinforcements rushed to defend Meridian Prime from an attack that never came, Strike Team 7 hit the supply depot. They used a new weapon that human engineers had cobbled together from captured alien technology and human ingenuity. The missile did not explode conventionally. Instead, it released a swarm of nanobots that ate through shield generators, power cores, and life support systems. Within an hour, the depot was a floating wreck. The Korvax garrison sent desperate distress calls as their ships lost power and air. Some human commanders argued for leaving them to die. Chen ordered rescue boys deployed instead. We are not monsters, she told her officers. We kill when we must, but we do not murder helpless survivors. That is the line we do not cross. That is what separates us from them. The rescued Korvax soldiers were treated for injuries and then released in escape pods toward their own lines. Chen made sure each one carried a data chip with a message. Surrender is an option. Occupation is not. Not all human commanders shared Chen's restraint. Captain Marcus Webb commanded a Marine unit operating in the ruins of New Haven Colony. His people had watched from hidden positions as Korvax occupation forces died from the engineered plague. He felt no pity. They came to our world, Webb told his second-in-command as they prepared for a raid on a Korvax supply convoy. They took our homes. They killed our people. Anything we do to them, they earned. Webb's team had developed a reputation that terrified the Korvax. They appeared like ghosts, striking fast and vanishing before reinforcements arrived. They wore experimental combat suits that bent light around them, making them nearly invisible. They used weapons designed to maximize psychological impact, sonic disruptors that caused hallucinations, holographic projectors that made a dozen soldiers appear to be hundreds, and chemicals that induced paralyzing fear. The Korvax started, calling them Terra's demons after one, particularly brutal engagement where Webb's team wiped out an entire Korvax platoon without suffering a single casualty. The name spread through the enemy forces, becoming a story told in whispers. The demons could be anywhere. They could see through walls. They could not be killed. Most of it was propaganda, but propaganda was a weapon too. Scared soldiers made mistakes, made fatal errors, made it easier for the next human team to kill them. High Commander Thexvar watched these developments with growing frustration. The war was now 8 months old, and despite capturing 7 human colonies, the Imperium was no closer to victory. His fleet commanders reported supply problems, morale issues, and increasing resistance from the occupied territories. Worse, the political situation was deteriorating. 3 species in the Galactic Council had formally withdrawn their support for the war. 2 more were making noises about reassessing their commitment to Imperium objectives. The cost of the conflict was bleeding the coalition dry. Thexvar called another council meeting, this time with only his most trusted advisors. We need a decisive victory, he said. Something that will break the humans' will to resist and show the council that the Imperium is still strong. We could target Earth directly, suggested Admiral Kreshevan. He had returned to active duty, though the biological weapon had left him weaker than before. A blockade of their homeworld would force them to negotiate. No, said another commander, a Vrel named Garshin. Our intelligence suggests Earth is the most heavily defended location in human space. An assault there could turn into another drawn-out campaign. We need something symbolic, something that hurts them psychologically. They settled on New Terra, humanity's newest and most remote colony. It was far from Earth, lightly defended, and home to almost 3 million civilians. The Imperium would make an example of it. Complete bombardment from orbit, leaving nothing but ruins. A message that further resistance was pointless. The Korvax assembled a massive fleet, 500 ships, enough to overwhelm any defense. They jumped into the new Terra system with weapons ready and found exactly what they expected. A handful of human military ships, desperately outmatched, and a planet full of helpless civilians. Admiral Kreshovon, commanding the assault, gave the order to begin bombardment. He watched as the first kinetic projectiles fell toward the planet's surface, imagining the destruction they would cause. Then his ship's alarms screamed. Sensors detected massive energy spikes throughout the fleet. The civilian ships around New Terra suddenly lit up with weapon signatures. They were not cargo haulers. They were Q-ships, warships disguised as merchants. "It is a trap," someone yelled, but by then it was too late. The planet's surface opened up, revealing hidden weapons platforms. Missile batteries that had been disguised as mining operations fired thousands of projectiles at the Korvax fleet. Railguns concealed in the orbital stations opened fire, and the human military ships that had seemed to be fleeing suddenly turned around and attacked from the rear. Kreshovon had walked into a carefully prepared killing ground. The humans had been waiting for the Imperium to try exactly this kind of attack. They had turned New Terra into a fortress and disguised it as an easy target. The battle was savage and short. The Korvax fleet, despite its size, was caught in a crossfire and suffered massive casualties. Ships exploded or spun away disabled. Escape pods filled space as crews abandoned dying vessels. Kreshovon's own flagship took 3 railgun hits and barely managed to jump away to hyperspace. Of the 500 ships that entered the New Terra system, only 147 escaped. It was the single largest military disaster in Korvax history. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The Imperium, which had never lost a major battle in 1,000 years, had been decisively beaten. The humans had not just survived, they had won. In the Galactic Council chambers, the Vrel representative stood and made a formal announcement. "My government can no longer support this war. The Imperium's actions have destabilized the entire sector, and the costs far outweigh any possible benefits. We are withdrawing all our forces and recalling our ambassadors." Within days, 5 more species made similar announcements. The coalition that had taken centuries to build was cracking apart. Species that had been conquered or coerced into joining the Imperium saw an opportunity. If the mighty Korvax could be beaten by these upstart humans, maybe they were not so invincible after all. Rebellions began on 3 occupied worlds. Species that had been client races for generations, suddenly refusing to obey orders. The Korvax had to divert forces to put down these uprisings, weakening their campaign against humanity even further. Admiral Chen received reports of the New Terra victory with satisfaction, but not celebration. She knew what it had cost. Over 2,000 human ships damaged or destroyed. Almost 50,000 casualties among the defending forces. New Terra's surface scarred by bombardment that had gotten through before the trap sprung. "We won the battle," she told her staff. "But we are not winning the war. We are just making them pay for every step forward. The question is whether they will break before we do." Captain Webb, fighting in the ruins of occupied colonies, had a different perspective. "We do not need to beat them," he said. "We just need to make them wish they had never started this. We need to make them understand that conquering humanity is not worth the price." High Commander Thexvar sat in his command chamber, reviewing casualty reports and cost assessments. His compound eyes processed the numbers with growing horror. The war entered its 2nd year with no end in sight. The Korvax Imperium, once the undisputed power in this sector of space, was bleeding from 1,000 wounds. What had started as a simple police action against primitive newcomers had become an existential crisis. In the council chambers, High Commander Thexvar faced representatives from the remaining allied species. Many seats were empty now. 12 species had withdrawn from the coalition entirely. Others remained but contributed nothing, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. "The Imperium requires additional support," Thexvar said, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. "We need ships, supplies, and personnel to maintain operations against the human insurgency." The Manthan delegate, a being of crystalline energy named Vorath, pulsed with what might have been amusement or contempt. "You said this war would be brief. You said the humans would surrender quickly. It has been 14 months. Your economy is in ruins. Your military is scattered across a dozen systems fighting an enemy that refuses to stand and fight properly." "The humans are using illegal tactics," Thexvar protested. "Biological weapons, sabotage, attacks on civilian targets. They violate every convention of warfare. Conventions that you wrote, Foreth pointed out. Conventions designed to preserve the existing power structure. The humans never agreed to them. You demanded they surrender or die. They chose neither option. They chose to make you pay. This was the problem that Thexvar was slowly coming to understand. The Imperium's way of war was designed for symmetrical conflicts between organized military forces. They were not prepared for an enemy that used every dirty trick, every unconventional tactic, every ruthless strategy to survive. Meanwhile, humanity was adapting and evolving. The war had forced them to innovate in ways that peacetime never would have. Human engineers, working with captured alien technology and their own desperate creativity, were producing new weapons at an alarming rate. The first breakthrough came from a research station hidden in the Kuiper belt of the Sol system. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo had been studying Korvax shield technology when she discovered something interesting. The shields were designed to stop high-velocity projectiles and energy weapons. They were not designed to stop something moving much slower. It is a loophole in their defensive systems, she explained to Admiral Chen via secure communication. If we fire projectiles below a certain velocity threshold, they pass right through the shields like they are not even there. How slow are we talking about? Chen asked. Slow enough that they can be seen coming and shot down by point defense systems. But if we can overwhelm those systems... Within 3 months, human forces were using what they called shield penetrator missiles. They were large, slow, and vulnerable to countermeasures, but launched in swarms they got through. Korvax ships that had been nearly invulnerable suddenly found themselves taking damage from weapons that should not have worked. The Imperium adapted, installing more point defense systems and developing new counter-tactics. But the humans adapted faster, always finding new weaknesses to exploit. It was an arms race that the Korvax, with their rigid military doctrine, were losing. On the ground, Captain Marcus Webb had been promoted to colonel and given command of the entire resistance operation in occupied territories. His forces had grown from a few hundred Marines to thousands of fighters, many of them civilians who had lost everything to the Korvax invasion. Webb stood in a hidden base carved into the mountains of New Haven, looking at a tactical display of Korvax positions. They are concentrating their forces, he told his officers, pulling back from the outlying regions and fortifying the major population centers. They are learning that they cannot hold everything, his second-in-command observed. They are reducing their exposure, which means they are admitting they cannot win, Webb said. They are switching from conquest to containment. Good. That means we are hurting them badly enough that they are changing strategy. But Webb knew the cost of that pain. New Haven's cities lay in ruins. The terraforming systems had been damaged, and the planet's atmosphere was slowly reverting to its original poisonous state. Millions of colonists had been killed in the initial invasion, or died in the months of occupation and resistance that followed. Webb had lost his own family in the first week. His wife and 2 children had been in one of the dome cities when the Korvax bombardment hit. He fought now not for victory but for vengeance, and he knew that made him dangerous in ways that went beyond military tactics. In the Sol system, Earth's governments were engaged in a desperate gamble. They were building a fleet using every resource they could scrape together. Shipyards worked around the clock. Retired vessels were pulled out of mothballs and refitted. Civilian ships were converted to military use. Admiral Chen had been recalled to Earth to oversee the operation. She stood in the orbital shipyard above Earth, watching as the new vessels took shape. They were not beautiful like the Korvax ships. They were ugly, functional, and built for one purpose, to kill. We are calling it Operation Revenant, the fleet coordinator told her, because we are going to rise from the grave and haunt them. The name was appropriate. The ships being built incorporated every lesson learned from 18 months of brutal warfare. They had the shield penetrators. They had improved armor designed by studying Korvax hull composition. They had electronic warfare systems that could jam enemy communications. And they had captains and crews who had survived against impossible odds and learned how to win. But the most important innovation was not technological. It was tactical. Humanity had finally accepted what they were fighting against. The Korvax Imperium was not just an enemy. It was a system, a structure that had dominated this region of space for millennia. To defeat it, they could not just win battles. They had to break the system itself. Admiral Chen explained it to Earth's unified military command. The Imperium's power comes from two sources. First, their military superiority. Second, the belief among allied species that resistance is futile. We have already damaged the first. Now we need to shatter the second. How do we do that? Asked General Torres, commander of Earth's defense forces. We show every species in the galaxy that the Imperium can be beaten. We take back our colonies. We drive the Korvax out of human space completely, and we make it so expensive for them that every other client race starts thinking about rebellion. The plan was ambitious, perhaps insane, but humanity had learned that conventional thinking would not save them. They needed to be bold, to take risks that no sane military commander would consider. The operation began 6 months later. The human fleet, newly built and crewed by veterans who had survived the war's early disasters, struck at the occupied colonies in a coordinated assault. Instead of the guerrilla tactics they had been using, they fought a conventional battle using conventional formations. The Korvax commanders were shocked. Where were the traps? The ambushes? The dirty tricks? Instead, they faced human ships that stood and fought, using tactics and strategies that the Imperium understood. Admiral Kreshvan, commanding the defense of New Haven, realized what was happening too late. It is not about the battle, he said as human ships hammered his defenses. They are sending a message to the entire galaxy. They are proving they can fight us on equal terms. He was right. The battle for New Haven lasted 3 days and was broadcast across the galaxy. Every species, every client race, every potential rebel watched as human forces fought the Korvax to a standstill and then pushed them back. The Imperium forces retreated, abandoning the colony after 18 months of occupation. When Colonel Webb walked into the ruins of his former home, now liberated but devastated beyond recognition, he felt no triumph, only exhaustion and loss. We won, one of his Marines said, did we? Webb asked, looking at the shattered domes and scorched earth. Look what it cost. But across the galaxy, other species were asking different questions. If the humans could retake their colonies, what else could they do? If the Korvax could be driven back, were they really as invincible as everyone believed? 3 more species withdrew from the Imperium. 2 client races openly rebelled, declaring independence. The coalition that Thexvar had relied on was collapsing faster than the military campaign. In the council chambers, now half empty, the High Commander faced the reality of his situation. We must seek a negotiated settlement, one of his advisors said quietly. That would mean admitting defeat. It would mean ending a war we cannot win. Every month we continue costs us more allies, more resources, more credibility. The humans cannot destroy us, but they do not need to. They just need to outlast us. Thexvar thought about the transmission, the warning the human ambassador had delivered almost 2 years ago. War has a price you will regret. He had not understood then. He had thought it was empty bravado from a species too primitive to know their place. Now he understood perfectly. The price was not just measured in ships destroyed or soldiers killed. It was measured in the collapse of an empire that had stood for thousands of years. The humans had not beaten the Imperium militarily. They had made the cost of victory higher than the Imperium could afford to pay. Prepare a message to the human command, Thexvar said finally. Request negotiations for a ceasefire. The conference station floated in neutral space, the same location where Ambassador Elena Vasquez had delivered her warning 2 years earlier. Now she was back, older and more tired, with gray hair that had turned completely white from the stress of the war. Across from her sat High Commander Thexvar, who looked diminished somehow, as if the weight of failure had physically crushed him. Between them lay the ruins of what both sides had lost. 7 human colonies devastated, 3 billion human lives ended, the Korvax Imperium fractured, with half its member species gone, trillions in economic damage, a generation scarred by violence that neither side had wanted but both had been unable to stop. We request a ceasefire, Thexvar said. His voice had lost the arrogant confidence it once held. An end to hostilities with terms to be negotiated. Elena looked at him for a long moment. You killed 3 billion of my people. You destroyed worlds that took us generations to build. And now you want to negotiate? What would you have us do? Fight until nothing remains? Your species has proven more resilient than we anticipated. Further conflict serves neither of our interests. You mean it serves your interest to stop now before you lose more allies and more credibility? Elena's voice was harsh. You wanted us to surrender when you held all the advantages. Now that the cost has become too high, suddenly you want peace. Thexvar's mandibles clicked in what might have been shame. You warned us. In your transmission, you warned us that war would cost more than we could afford. We did not listen. That failure is mine, and I will carry it for whatever remains of my life. Elena studied the alien commander. She saw genuine regret there, mixed with the exhaustion of someone who had spent 2 years making terrible decisions and watching them play out in blood and fire. She felt no sympathy, but she recognized a kindred spirit. She too had made decisions that sent people to die. A ceasefire requires terms, Elena said. What are you offering? Withdrawal from all occupied human territories, reparations for damages caused, recognition of human sovereignty over all claimed space, and a formal treaty of non-aggression. Not enough. Thexvar's compound eyes focused on her. What more do you want? Total surrender? The dissolution of the Imperium? We are defeated, Ambassador, but we are not destroyed. Push too hard and we will fight to the last ship. I do not want your surrender, Elena said quietly. I want guarantees that this will never happen again. Not to us, not to anyone. The Imperium's habit of conquering and subjugating weaker species needs to end. You ask us to change our entire civilization. I ask you to evolve beyond the need for conquest. Otherwise, we will find ourselves at war again in a generation. Or you will find yourselves at war with some other species who refuses to submit. The cycle will continue until someone breaks it. The negotiations lasted 3 months. Back on Earth, the debates were fierce. Some wanted to push for complete victory, to destroy the Korvax Imperium entirely. Others, like Admiral Chen, argued for a measured approach. We can win more battles, Chen told Earth's leadership. We might even be able to take the war to Korvax's home territory. But at what cost? How many more billions have to die? We have proven our point. Now we need to secure a peace that allows us to rebuild. Colonel Webb, now General Webb after his promotion, took a harder line. They came to our worlds. They killed our people. They need to pay for what they did. They are paying, Elena told him during one heated discussion. Their empire is falling apart. Their economy is in ruins. Their military credibility is shattered. Pushing for more will not bring back the dead. It will only create more bodies on both sides. Webb looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. Then what was the point? What did my family die for? So that humanity could survive. So that we could prove that we will not be conquered or enslaved. So that every other species in the galaxy knows that we have teeth and we will use them if necessary. Elena's voice softened. I lost people too, Marcus. Everyone has. But if we keep fighting just for revenge, we become the same as them. We become conquerors ourselves. The final treaty was signed 6 months after negotiations began. The Korvax withdrew from all human territories, leaving behind devastated worlds and traumatized populations. They paid reparations, though both sides knew that no amount of money could truly compensate for what had been lost. More importantly, the treaty established humanity as an independent power in the galactic community, with full sovereignty and the right to defend itself. Other species, watching how the war had ended, began reassessing their own relationships with the Imperium. The age of Korvax dominance was over. The Galactic Council reconvened with a very different composition. New species joined, including humanity. Old power structures were questioned and, in some cases, dismantled. The Council offered aid to help rebuild human colonies, partly out of genuine sympathy and partly out of fear of what humanity might do if left bitter and isolated. Marcus Webb stood in the ruins of New Haven, where his family had died, watching as reconstruction crews began the long process of rebuilding. The atmosphere was still toxic, requiring environment suits. The domes were shattered, but people were coming back, determined to reclaim what had been taken from them. It does not feel like victory, he said to Elena, who had come to visit the memorial being constructed for the dead. It is not victory, Elena replied. Victory would mean we won something worth the cost. This is just survival. We paid a terrible price to prove we could not be conquered. Now we have to decide what we do with that survival. She gestured to the memorial, a massive wall with 3 billion names carved into its surface. These people did not die for glory or conquest. They died because someone else decided their lives were worth less than political advantage. That is the lesson we need to remember. Admiral Chen Wei, now retired for the second and final time, gave a speech at Earth's official memorial ceremony. She stood before a crowd of millions, both in person and watching remotely. and spoke with the weight of someone who had sent thousands to their deaths. "We did not want this war," she said. "We tried to avoid it. We warned them what would happen. But when war came anyway, we did what humans have always done. We fought, we adapted. We paid any price necessary to survive." She paused, looking out over the crowd. "But survival is not enough. We must build something better from these ruins. We must create a future where such wars become impossible, not through conquest but through mutual respect, not through fear but through understanding. That is how we honor the dead. That is how we make sure they did not die for nothing." The message resonated across human space. Reconstruction began in earnest. The devastated colonies received aid not just from Earth but from other galactic species, many of whom had been impressed by humanity's resilience. New colonies were established, this time with proper defenses and alliances to protect them. The Korvax Imperium, meanwhile, collapsed into civil war as species that had been subjugated for centuries saw their chance for freedom. Thexvar was removed from power by his own people, who blamed him for the disaster. He spent his remaining years in exile, a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance. Admiral Kreshevan, who had survived the war despite his injuries, wrote a memoir about the conflict that became required reading in military academies across the galaxy. In it he wrote, "We thought we were fighting primitives. We discovered we were fighting survivors. We thought we were teaching them their place. We discovered they had no place except the one they carved out for themselves. We thought war was about superior technology and numbers. We learned that war is about will, and humanity's will to survive exceeded our will to conquer." 5 years after the war ended, Elena Vasquez returned to the conference station one final time. The Galactic Council had asked her to serve as the first human ambassador to the Reformed Council. She accepted, knowing that the real work was just beginning. Before she took her seat, she requested permission to play a recording. It was the same message she had delivered before the war, the warning that no one had heeded. As it played, showing images of human history and the cost of war, the assembled delegates listened in silence. When it ended, Elena spoke. "This message was a plea for peace. It was ignored, and millions died as a result. I am playing it again not to assign blame, but to remind us all of what happens when diplomacy fails. When dialogue is replaced by ultimatums, when pride matters more than survival." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of species. Humanity paid a terrible price to learn that we could not be conquered. The Korvax paid a terrible price to learn that conquest is not worth its cost. Now we all have a choice. We can learn from that lesson, or we can repeat it. We can build a future based on mutual respect, or we can continue the cycle of domination and resistance. The Manthan delegate Voreth pulsed with what might have been approval. What does humanity propose? We propose a new framework for the Council. One where membership is voluntary, not coerced. Where disputes are resolved through negotiation, not force. Where every species, regardless of military power, has an equal voice. It will not be easy. It will not be perfect. But it will be better than the alternative.